Hello everyone, my name is Joe Diaz. I am a graphic designer and sign artist from Central Illinois. And today what I'm going to be doing is re-recording a webinar that I did a few weeks ago. And this webinar is, is mainly about my process when designing layouts. Layouts that might be anything from logos to signs to business cards, websites maybe, murals. The one thing all these projects that we do at our shop have in common is they usually involve lettering and type. So what I'm going to be doing is sharing with you a few of my tips and tricks for creating custom lettering effects within CorelDRAW. So after sitting down and discussing with the client their goals, what they hope to achieve with the design that they've hired us to create, I would, first thing I would do is once I get into CorelDRAW here and start brainstorming and laying out my design, is come up with a great lettering style that matches the theme and the look for that project. So for example, let's say I was designing a logo that had a cartoon on it. I may want to go with a casual lettering style for that cartoony design. Let's say the client hired us to design a wedding invitation. I might want to go with a script. Maybe not this script, but script might be something that would be good for that. So this is kind of just a small sampling of the different types of lettering styles that are out there. It's nowhere close to all of them, but just a few examples. It's also important when picking out lettering styles and fonts to know how the design is going to be used. So for example, let's say I were designing a sign that needed to be read from a pretty decent distance away. I might want to avoid using a lettering style like this. Now this lettering might be great for a website or maybe even on business cards, but may not be good for a sign that needs to be read from a good distance away. So in our industry, in the sign industry, we have this thing called the squint test, and it's pretty basic. All you got to do is, once you get your design laid out, squint your eyes, and if you can't read the design, it doesn't pass the squint test. And that's basically to simulate, reading something from far away. And we do it all the time here at our shop, and it's a great way to make sure that the design that you created does its job. So this is just a few examples of some lettering styles that you can pick from. Now on the other hand, there might be some type styles that you might want to avoid. And in my opinion, it's almost more important that you understand why you should avoid these things rather than just knowing that you need to avoid certain things. So for example, this thick and thin lettering style, I might try to avoid that because the thinner parts of the lettering from a distance would disappear, and all you'd be left with are the thick parts, and it would basically create something that would be very difficult to read from a distance. So I would avoid using a lettering style like that. Another good example would be something that's too condensed. I have found that the space around the lettering is almost as important as the lettering itself. When people look at lettering, subconsciously they kind of look at the border around the lettering and they take in everything all at once, and that includes the space around the lettering. So if you have lettering that's too condensed, what you actually do is you swallow up the space around the lettering, even the parts within the lettering, like the centers of O's or D's. And so from a distance, and not really even a far distance, but just sitting here looking at my monitor right now, this is extremely difficult to read. and that's because the space around the lettering isn't showing up enough to make this easy to read. So I would avoid using something that's too condensed like that. You know, you got your classic all caps Old English. Here again, just something that's extremely difficult to read. All caps script. Scripts are designed to be used as case-sensitive lettering. So you have your capitals and your lowercases working together. And so when it's all capitals, it just doesn't quite look right. And so that's something I would avoid. Putting a script on an arc is also something that's very awkward, and I sometimes see designers doing that, and that's something that I think you should avoid. Script is already italicized, and whenever something is italicized and then also following a curve like that, it just looks awkward, and it looks like it's kind of fallen off the hill here. So I would try to avoid something like that as well. Another thing that's important when doing a layout or a logo or any type of design is color and contrast, and it plays a huge role in making a design you know, legible, or even, you know, drawing the viewer's eye to a certain part of the design. So here's a good example. This is a design that I did a few years ago. This is actually how it ended up, you know, how it was finalized. But here's kind of an example of, here's, you know, the lettering is quite a bit lighter than how it ended up being, and I did this to show you how color and contrast can draw the eye to certain parts of the design. In this case, since the lettering isn't high enough contrast off the background, whereas the rocket, on the other hand, is real bright and vivid, and there's a lot of contrast here. From a distance or from anywhere really, when the viewer looks at this design, their eye is drawn towards the rocket first, and then they'll look at the lettering. So knowing that, you can actually kind of force the viewer to look at certain things in a certain order. And the same can be said for lettering styles. For example, in this case, this lettering is quite a bit larger, and it's you know, stands out a little bit more. So you would read this first, and then you would read this second. However, a lot of times when I do secondary copy, I try to use less effects on the secondary copy, keep it real simple and straightforward. And the reason why is, even though this doesn't stand out quite as much as the main copy, I want it to be extremely easy to read. So as soon as you're done looking at this, you know, your eye automatically drops down to this, and it's just very easy to take in. So these are the kind of things that go through my head when I'm doing a layout. Now here's an example of, actually let me, what I wanted to show you here, let's make this contour darker here. What I want to do here is show you what happens when you create an outline or a contour around lettering, and if the contrast from that background and the outline are, you know, you've got good contrast there, but you don't have good contrast between the lettering and the outline. Just like in the example with the lettering that's too condensed, you run into the same thing. From a distance, people read this lettering, they look at, their eye is drawn towards this line here rather than the outline around the actual lettering. And so what they see is this shape instead of the lettering. And, you know, we lose this, we lose this, you know, we probably lose these too. So from a distance, if you do your squint test, it just looks like a blur. You know, just a random shape, and it doesn't read well. Now, in the same token, if you look at this lettering here, right now it reads pretty well, but from a distance it will not read as well as this. And the reason why is we've got high contrast between the outline and the background, and the outline and the lettering. And so it's, you know, you've got two different borders here that your eye is drawn towards, and it's just a little more complicated than it needs to be. And so, you know, whether it be subconsciously or just the way the eye takes in things, it just reads a little bit harder than if you were to have your outline be a lighter color, closer to the color of the background, your lettering be darker, then what you have is something that's a lot easier to read. And the same goes for this. So if we were to make this a lighter background, that would read a lot better. So I'm going to get right into it and show you how I created this here. So the first thing you do is you go to your text tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just take this, pull this down, and we'll work on this down here. Oops, ungroup that. Okay. So the first thing I would do is go to my text tool and type out the name of the company. Alrighty. And then I would choose a font. In this case, I already know what font I use, so I'm just going to redo that again. Alright. Now, if you go to the shape tool here, the cool thing about the shape tool is you can adjust the kerning of your words, which is, kerning is essentially the space in between your letters, and even in between words too. So in CorelDRAW, when you select the shape tool and you have your lettering selected, and you click on this node here, you can adjust the space in between the lettering. Now, if you were to do that same thing but hold the shift button down on your keyboard, it adjusts the space in between words. If we had two lines of text, if you were to use this here, it would adjust the space between lines. Then you can also grab individual letters and move them around however you want. If you hold your shift key down, your control key down, you can keep it on the baseline of the text. So I do that quite a bit. But that's just kind of a quick little glimpse of what will happen if you use the shape tool when you have your text selected. So once I get my kerning the way I want it, then my next step would be to convert this to curves. And from here on out, I can't actually edit the font. It's no longer a font. Now it's basically a shape, and I would go on treating this as if it were any type of illustration. You know, if it was an illustration of a car or a person or anything. It is no longer lettering from here on out. So after I do that, I'm going to break this all apart. I'm going to lock my background. In this case, because I've got this color that I want to use for my background, what I can actually do is right click on the background and hit lock object. And so now this rectangle that I've created with this lighter background, I can actually select it on accident. It's locked in place. So now that that's out of the way, what I'll do is select just this, and I'm going to combine those letters back together. And what that's going to do is that's going to take my you can't see it right now, but if I go into wireframe, you can see the center of my O there. So I'm going to go back into enhance. So it's still there, it's just not combined. It's actually two different shapes laying on top of each other. So I'm going to select both of those and select combine, and I'm going to do the R separately, and I'm going to do the same thing over here with the OAD, combine that, and do this R separately. Now what I'm going to do is select both R's, and when I select both R's and I grab this node here, I can actually scale them together at the same rate. I want those R's to be the same size like they are up here. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to hold my control key down and move this over just a little bit. Keep it on that baseline there. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. Hold the control key down. Now if I wanted to get really picky, what I could do is find a node here, create a rectangle, and do that. And then I'll just give it a color so I can see it. And so really what I'm paying attention to is this bottom line. Now I can move that over here. And move this over a little bit so that it's about the same distance. And delete that. And so I do that a lot. I just create little squares and rectangles to kind of help me measure things out. You'll notice another thing when I was doing that. So I'll create a rectangle here. You'll notice that it kind of snaps to that node there, and it says node. I can also have it snap to the center, so like the center line here, or the center of this line that makes up the top of that D. It should say, there we go, midpoint. And you know, if you had a circle and you were to take your square, you can see it kind of snaps to the center of the circle or the quadrants of each of the circle, or you can have it, you know, snap to the edge of the circle. And I think by default that's turned on. If that's something that, you know, sometimes I don't like that on, so I'll turn it off temporarily. And you can do that a couple different ways. The one way to do it is to go to View and then go to Snap to, and you'll see Snap to Objects. But I like to use Alt-Z to turn it, to toggle it on and off. So sometimes I don't want things, you know, accidentally snapping to other things, and I'll press, you know, Alt-Z to turn that off and then turn it back on when I'm ready for it again. So once I got that set up the way I want it, I'm going to combine it. And now you'll see up here I've got these kind of, this is to kind of illustrate that it's got some movement to it, and that's really easy to do. I use my the freehand tool, which is one of my favorite tools, and I'll give you kind of a quick little showcase of how that works. When you select the freehand tool and you are you click and hold down the mouse button, what happens is it basically follows your mouse movements, and so you can create abstract shapes like that. And I use that a lot for doing illustrations and to kind of, you know, if you have a tablet, it may work even better for you. When you're doing that, up here is the freehand smoothing, and I usually keep mine pretty high. Just to give you an example, if you keep it low, here's what happens. It's very accurate on how it records your movement, almost too accurate. So, but there may be some cases where you want it to be that way. Here again, if you're using a tablet, you may want it to be that way. But you can see it followed everything, and there's more nodes compared to something like this that's a little more smooth. So if we were to crank that up to, let's say, 90, it's going to do less nodes. Now the other thing you can do, I'm going to undo that a couple times. Undo is Control-Z. Let's say we have all these nodes here. One thing you can do is, once you select your shape, go to Shape Tool and draw a box around this, and this is going to select all those nodes that make up that shape. And you can hit Reduce Nodes, and sometimes that will help, or you can manually adjust the smoothness of your curve, and you know, that will do different things. Or you can go in and manually delete them this way too. So you may not want to delete all those. So that's I use the freehand tool in addition to the shape tool quite a bit to draw custom shapes. But going back to the freehand tool, remember how I showed you earlier, if you click and hold down the mouse button, it will follow your mouse movement. If you click once and let go, you can see it pulls out a straight line. Now if you click again, you've created, or you've ended that line. So if I click once, pull out, click again, and then click a second time, right when I'm over top of that node there, it has basically connected my next line to that first line I created. And so you can create shapes that way too. Sometimes when I'm doing illustrations, I'll do that. I'll rough out the outline of whatever shape I'm creating by using straight lines, because it's a real quick way of doing it. And then I will come in later and convert things to curves and adjust shapes that way and add nodes as I go. You can double click to add nodes, or you can double click to remove them, and so you can kind of make your own shapes that way. So back to our road rocket here. What I'm going to do is click once, and click again, and then click once, click one more time, and so I've created a little wedge here that I'll use at the top of this lettering. And I can scale that a little bit. Now I'm just going to duplicate that wedge. Again, that's Control D. We'll duplicate. And I'm going to get rid of my outlines here. Just have it be a black fill. Now in this case, I don't want that touching the D, so I might shrink it a little bit. It's a little different from this. It's no big deal. It is up here too. So it looked like I had that kind of like this down there. Maybe make those a little smaller. And so we got something kind of similar to that. It's not exactly the same, but that's how I did it. And what I'm going to do now is weld all this together. And so now by welding that to this shape, I've created, if I go into my wireframe, I've created a new, shape. This whole thing is just one shape. So if I were to give it a different fill color, it happens to the entire lettering there. So what I can do next is, if I select my shape once, and I'm using my pick tool here, and I select it a second time, now I've got my rotate and skew options available. So what I'll do is I'll just skew that up a little bit like that. And as you can see, we're very similar to what we have going on there. And so now what I want to do is show you how I create this this drop shadow here. So the first thing I would do is create a contour. And now the contour tool can be found in with these tools here. You've got your blend, your contour, distort, drop shadow. So we've got a lot of really great tools that I use quite a bit here. So I'm going to start with the contour tool. And you can either click and drag to create contours. I like to do it manually. I like to select it once, and then let me give it a color so that we can see it a little bit on the screen. We'll do red. That's not how I would, I obviously wouldn't use red in this case, but just so we can see what we're doing. Let's make that, let's go with 10 there. Okay. Now I'm going to break that apart. And so now I've got two different shapes. And all I did there was I right-clicked on that red, and then that break apart option was available there. So now what I'm going to do is duplicate this black. So I'll hit Control D. And I want to put this, let's make it a different color here. We'll make it blue for now. I want to put this blue behind the red, and you can do that a couple different ways. You can go up to Arrange and then Order, and you could say behind, and when you hit behind it gives you this arrow, and then you could select the red. So that's one way of doing it. I'm going to undo that. What I like to do though is just, since I duplicated this black, I know it's only, you know, a couple levels above this red. So what I like to do is select the blue and hold down Control and select Page Down, and that moves it down a step, and then once more, and it moves it down one more step. Now at the same time, Control Page Up would bring it forward. So I like to do that. And so what I would do is I'd take this and just stagger it off to the side a little bit, so down and over a little. And then I would come in and I would make this red either the background color or maybe even a lighter color like a white. And then I would make the shadow here a very close color to the background, but just darker. So maybe a tan. That would be a good color. Now you'll notice that I've started with this dark red color here, and then I've got an internal contour. And so just like the contour I use to create the border, I can do the same to create an internal contour. So first, we're going to give it a dark red color. Let me mix up a color. Here's a cool trick. If you've got a color, let's say we started with this really bright red, and I want to make that a dark red. You know, I could add blue, or I could just add black. In this case, I'm just going to add black. If you hold down your Control key, and then you select a second color, it will add that second color to the first color, just a little bit too. So we can hit the black a few times, and we create a nice, real deep, dark red. And so that's a pretty close color to what we used here. Now what I'm going to do is select the shape one more time, and I'm going to go to the contour tool, and I am going to select inside contour, and what that's done is that's created a contour to the inside of the lettering. Now here again, it's important that I keep the contrast on this line between the dark here and the light here. I want this to be the focal point, this to be, you know, where the eye is drawn to. So when I create this internal contour, it's going to be a similar color to this, but I might make it lighter instead of darker, because I want this to be really dark against this being really light. So you can see I did that same thing here. Now you can also see this is a darker color, and then it fades up, and that's real easy to do. So I'm going to select this internal red here, and select Break Contour Group Apart, and now it's a separate shape. And I'm going to select the red here, and if you select the interactive fill tool down here, by default when you click and drag, it's going to create a linear gradient, and in this case we want it to go uphill, so I'm going to do that. Now I don't want this to be a real light color, I want it to be closer to this color here. So the really cool thing about CorelDRAW, and I think the newer versions added this, older versions may not have had this, when you select your fill color up here, you can either, you know, select one of the two colors here, or maybe add a third color if you wanted to by just double clicking anywhere there. But if we select this color here, I can either add a color like that, or I can go up here, add colors up here. But this is a really cool thing. There's an eyedropper tool built in to this menu here, and I like to use that. Just, you know, select that, and then I select that dark red that I mixed. Oops, let me do that again. I think I missed it. And as you can see, it added that there. So I'll pull this down a little bit further. And so we've created a nice kind of casual gradient You know, nothing that's too intense. So we'll move back up here. Now you'll see that there's kind of a highlight here that's kind of to give it the illusion that this is a little bit dimensional and that the light is kind of hitting the edge of the lettering here. Now that's real easy to do. So what I do is I take my internal contour here and I duplicate that, and let's just make that yellow for the time being. Now I'm going to move that shape back here again with my snap to points or snap to objects turned on. I'm going to go ahead and put that right over top of that first tool, or that first lettering that we duplicated, and so now it's right on top of that. Now I'm going to select that yellow shape, the new shape that I've created. I'm going to select that and duplicate that again. And now this time I'm going to make it let's just make it a purple for the time being. And I'm going to move that down and over a little bit so that we've got a little bit of our yellow peeking through the top. Now I will select the purple shape and the yellow shape, and I'll go up here to my these are your kind of, you've got weld, you've got trim, you've got intersect, a lot of cool tools, along with your combine, and then also your group tools will be up here. Your groups and ungroups will be up here. So what I'll do is select the purple, select the yellow, and I'm going to hit trim. And what that's done is that's trimmed out the yellow behind the purple. And so I'll delete the purple, and now I'm left with that yellow highlight. Now what we want to do is make that a real bright red, so I'm going to select that red there. I may even add a hint of orange in there. Here again, if I hold down my control key and select orange a few times, maybe white once, it's created a nice red highlight, just like we have up here. Now I'm going to show you how to create this effect here. It's pretty easy. Here again we will use the contour tool once more. So go to your contour tool and make sure you're selecting this shape and not your highlighted color that you just created. And again, we're going to do inside contour, and I'm going to, that's probably good right there. I'm going to right click on that. Oh, you'll notice that it's got a gradient to it, and what CorelDRAW does is, since I've created a gradient back here, it's decided that this should probably have a gradient too, and you can actually go in there and change what those gradient colors are. In my case, what I'm going to just do is select that new shape, that new contour. I'm going to break it apart, and so now I've got a new shape here. And I'm going to let's just make it, we're going to give it 0 fill, and we're going to get rid of the fill, and I am going to give it a black outline instead. Now you can apply outlines to shapes down here if you go to outline pen, and then you can select a width of that line, and you can even adjust your color here. What I like to do is if you're over here with your color palette and you right click on any one of these colors, it will turn your outline to whatever color you right click on. So there's yellow, there's black. So I'm just going to do that for now, just so I can see what I'm doing. And it doesn't need to be pretty. You can actually go in here and clean up some of these stray nodes that you don't want. I can do that here too. Here again, I use my shape tool, and I can manipulate things the way I want it, and just kind of clean up some of that stuff. You can get real picky with it, but in this case, let's stay on subject here with this. We've created an internal contour, and so now what I'm going to do is create a really long rectangle, and I'm going to hit Control D, which will duplicate it, and I'm going to move it down just a little bit more. And now if I hit Control D again, instead of it going way up here like it did the first time, it will do the same. It will move at the same amount of distance that my first duplicate command did. And so what we can do is quickly create this row of, or column of long rectangles here. And so I'm going to select all those, combine those, creating one shape. And for the time being, I'm just going to create a blue so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to get rid of my outline. And I'm going to place that over top of my lettering here. And then I'm going to select it one more time. I'll give you my skew commands here. And I'm going to try to copy that same skew there. And so now that's laying over top. Now there's a couple different things you could do here. One way is to select this blue and go up to Effects and use the Power Clip tool, which is a great tool. And then you would say Place Inside Container. And so we're placing this blue inside of this internal contour that I created. And so what that's done is snap that in there like that. Now if you wanted to go in there and actually adjust that, you can hold down your Control key and select that shape, and it will take you within that power clipped shape. And you would select this to stop editing and go back outside of it. You can also use these tools to edit the power clip, or you can right click on there and edit power clip. So there's a lot of different ways to get in there. So once you're in there, then we could, select the color that we want. So that would be one way that we could do it. What I'm going to do now is extract my contents, and what that's going to do is that's going to take those blue lines that I made and bring it out of that power clip. Now I want to show you something real quick, because this is a newer feature that they added in the upgrade. You'll notice that there's this X there that's kind of going through there, and that's what happens when you extract something from a power clip. To get rid of that, what you want to do is right click on that shape, and you want to go to Frame Type and select None, and that gets rid of that. That basically brings it back to being a regular shape. So if you ever run into that, that's the right click, and then you would go to Frame Type, and then you can do that. So I'm going to bring that back to where we were. Here's another way you can do it. You can take our blue bars here, select this shape, and then use the Intersect tool. Then we would delete our blue shape, and what we're left with is our new shape. And so we can even delete this shape here. We won't need that anymore. All we're left with is that. And so what I would do then is use my eyedrop tool and select my color eyedropper, and we'll grab this color here, select that like that, and then we will go to our outline and get rid of our outline. And we could add a gradient to that too if we wanted. I think I did up here. Oh, actually in this case I had it lighter. That's pretty easy to do too. All we have to do is select this color here. And here again, if we go down to our interactive fill tool, if we click here once and we pull up, and then let's select this here, our eyedropper tool, and go with a lighter color. We can do it that way too. So it's not quite identical to what we have going up here, but it's pretty close. So that is how I created that lettering there. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a few other designs that I've created, and I'm not going to show you how to design this whole thing, but I want to show you just a few little tricks that I use when designing this. This is a design that is going to end up becoming a mural. But what we've got here is, we've got several contours being used here. This isn't quite the same as the drop shadow I showed you how to create in that last design, so I'll show you how to do that. And then I've created little rivets in there. That's pretty easy to do. Just a quick little to show you how that works. I just create a circle and I duplicate, and then I duplicate again, and so I basically do that, and it's not super precise, but because it's not since it doesn't make up the shape of the lettering and it's just kind of an extra element, it doesn't need to be exact. In fact, if you think about how things are riveted together, sometimes they may not be put in there super precisely, precise. So that's how I did that. But the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to have text go over an arc, and there's a couple different ways we can do that. So let's go over here, and I'll type in CorelDRAW, and let's select a font that's somewhat similar to what we had there. Let's see. That one's pretty close. We'll go with that. I adjust the kerning just a little bit so there's more space around the lettering. So the first thing we could do is we could create a circle or an ellipse, and we'll end up deleting this, but just for the time being, this is what we're going to use. Then you select your lettering that you created, and you go up to text, and you go to fit text to path. It gives you this arrow here with the A and then the curve underneath it. That lets you know that you have that turned on. Now you select your circle here, and you see it kind of gives you a little preview of what it's going to do. Also, once you get towards the center, or the quadrant of this, the top quadrant of this oval, it gives you that red bar, and it kind of snaps. Also, you can pull it down, and it almost creates a little contour temporarily for that lettering to go on. So that's one way to do it. Now once you've selected that, you'll notice that our lettering is following the curves, whereas in this case it's going straight up and down. Now that's very easy to do. When it's still in this state, what you can do is go over to here, text orientation, and select that middle option there, and you can see the other ones kind of do different variations of that. I like to do this one here. I'm either usually using this one or this one, the way it does it by default. So I'm going to select this here, and from there you can convert it to curves, and or you can leave it like this and add things to it. Oh, that font. There we go. So that's one way of doing it. Another way you can kind of create a similar effect would be to type out our lettering. Now once I've selected this font, it will actually be stored up here with my most recent selected fonts, so I can quickly grab the one that I just used last. The other thing you could do is, if you wanted, is go to your attributes eyedropper tool, select this, and then apply it to that, and it will make it the same size too. And it doesn't have to. You can actually go in here and tell it not to do certain things. So in this case, if I had a drop shadow applied to it or a power clip applied to it, and I were to select this and apply it to that, it would copy all those effects. I have a lot of these turned off, but sometimes I'll turn them on if I need them on. So now from here on out, I can convert this to curves. I don't really need it to be lettering anymore. Then I go down to where my contour tool is, and I click on the little arrow in the bottom corner, and it gives me these additional tools. And what I will be using is the envelope tool. So if you select that, it's created this box around the envelope tool, or around your lettering. And the first thing I like to do is kind of get rid of these nodes because I won't need those. And then if you grab the center of this line here and you pull it up, you've created a similar effect to what's going on down here. Now you can do the same thing to the top too, or you might want to just leave it like that. That might make a nice little design. You could do lettering across the top here in a straight line, and then underneath here do some sort of illustration, and that would make a nice little design. So that's how you do that. And you can do a lot of crazy stuff with this. I mean, you can really distort this lettering. So that's one way of doing it too. So now I told you I'd show you how to do this. This is a little different than the drop shadow I did before. So let's move into that. I'm going to convert this to curves. I'm going to delete our oval there. And I'm going to start off by going to my contour tool. I use the contour tool a lot, people. It's a great tool for doing this stuff. We do outside contour. And I'll break that apart. And we'll make that a real light color for the time being. And right now, I'm going to give it an outline color just because the next step is a little easier to visualize when there's an outline to it. So I'd recommend maybe doing that after you do this next step here. Now you go down to where your contour tool was again, and you select the arrow, and you get your additional tools here. And I am going to use the extrude tool. Now, extrude tool is pretty cool. I'll show you cool things, a few cool things with that. If you kind of select here in the middle anywhere, we want to do it to this gray shape, not the black lettering. And I'm going to click, and if I hold my control key down, I can kind of make sure that snaps to 15-degree increments here. So I'm going to go straight down with it. And as you can see, we'll create a nice little effect there. Now in this case, that's going a little farther back than I want. That kind of looks like the Superman logo, and I'm going to dial that back a notch, and you can change the depth up here, and it kind of does it at 5 points. So I'm going to do something like that. That'll work. So now I've done that, I can actually break that apart, and what that's done is separated this from this. And you can, if you wanted to get in here and light this in certain ways, you definitely could. So you could have this be real dark here, and then this be light here, as if it was, the light was coming at an angle. In this case, I am going to ungroup all of this, and I'm going to weld it together and just create one shape. Now I'm going to get rid of my outlines. I don't need those anymore. And I'm going to go with a darker color like that. So as you can see, that's what we've got now. Now I'm going to select both of these shapes, and I'm going to use this. Actually, I'm not going to use the create boundaries. I'll explain why here in a second. What I'm going to do here is duplicate this. Just bring this down for a second so I can work on it. And then I'm going to weld this together. And so I've created a new shape from those two shapes. I'm going to bring that up here. I'm going to move that to the front by selecting Shift Page Up. And I'm just going to make that red for now. I'm going to select this, and I'm going to go to my contour tool and make sure it's outside contour, and we'll do something like that. Now I'm going to break this apart, delete this shape, and throw that to the back, and we'll make that a light color. So now I've got three different shapes going on here for my my drop shadow. This shape here, this shape here, and this shape, which is the same color as this first shape. So what we can do there is we can go back to our extrude tool and click there and pull down. And here again, this is why I say if you give that an outline, it kind of allows you to see what's going on a little bit better. Now we've got some nodes here that's creating these. If I go into my shape tool and select this, you can see these nodes are creating that there. In this case, it's not going to matter because we're going to end up welding that all together. But if you were to, like I said, if you were to be given these different segments, different colors, you might want to, address that. So I'll go back to my extrude tool and check my depth, make it a little bit smaller. And one more time, I will break this apart. As you can see, now they're separate shapes. Ungroup it and weld it together. And we'll go with the dark gray there, or medium gray I should say, and get rid of my outlines. And so that kind of created a nice little stair step effect, which is the same thing that I did here. And as you can see, you can create internal contours. So this would be an internal contour. Here's one more. Like I said, just made a little circles and added those where I thought it looked best. Just like I did the stripes before in the first example I showed you, I did the same thing here, but I followed the curve of the lettering. So I kind of created these two lines here. And that's how you do that. While I'm talking about the extrude tool, I want to show you one more thing. Let's say you had, let's make a star. Oops, let's make a 5-point star. Let's keep it simple. And we'll convert that to curves. Let's say we used our extrude tool and we went straight back with it like that. Now what you can't see is it's actually it's there, but it's it's behind this, and I'll get to that here in a second. Now what you can do is you can either click on this a second time, and it gives you these new options here to rotate this like a 3D shape, and we can adjust our depth just like we were able to before. And so you can kind of manipulate it like it were you were using a 3D program, or you can do it manually by, you know, selecting how much you want to rotate it. So manually inputting your values is another way you could do it. So that's kind of a fun thing. Another thing you can do is, you know, apply gradients to your drop shadow. There again, before I was telling you about how you need to watch out for those things, this might be a good time to do that. You can add bevels. Oops, that's a little too intense. Dial that back a notch. You can show the bevel only if you wanted to. It's kind of another cool effect that you can add to lettering too. You know, you don't. It's not just stars that you can do that with. Any shape you can do that with. And then you can actually add lighting. This is really cool. So you can kind of go here and move your lights around, and as you can see, it just like a 3D program. It will. You can add multiple lights and change the intensity of the light even. So that's a very cool, you know, part of the extrude tool. It's very powerful. Allows you to do some really cool stuff, especially with lettering. All right, I want to show you another really cool. In this case, I didn't actually do that for this design, but show you a little trick that I use sometimes. I'm going to select this outer contour here and go to my contour tool and go to inside contour, and right now it's a red color. It doesn't matter what color it is. I'm actually going to get rid of the fill, and I'm going to break that contour apart, and I'm going to get rid of the fill, and I'm going to go to my outline pen tool. Oops, and go up to outline pen, and I'm going to give it, let's just go with hairline for now. I'll adjust that later. But here's where the really cool part comes in. Where it says style, you can actually select some of these dash lines here, and you can even design your own dash line if you wanted to. By hitting edit style, you can kind of create your own custom dash line. But in this case, I want to keep it pretty simple. And let's go with this one here, and I will select OK. And the reason why I do that is that kind of looks like this is a piece of fabric, and it's stitched onto the background. And I've done that in a few designs, and people seem to really like it. So we can adjust the size. Oop, that's a little too big. There you go. And what I would probably do is make it a color that's pretty similar to the background color that it's on, but not exact. So maybe something a little darker like that. You know, let's say you had this as like a blue jean color. Let's go with like a dark navy. Oops. There we go. There's my colors I like. And we were to convert our line to a golden color. You know, that might be something you might see on blue jeans. You know what I mean? When you look at the stitching on blue jeans, a lot of times it's that gold color. So that's just kind of a cool little trick I like to use every once in a while. Now in this case, I've got the B going in front of this banner here, or ribbon I should say, and I'll go into wireframe to show you how that's done. You can see the shape actually goes in front, and then I basically just trimmed out this part of that shape so that the banner looks like it's running in front of it. It actually isn't. If I move this down just a little bit, you can see it's not that it's moving in front of it, it's just this has been trimmed out, and so it gives it the illusion that it's running behind this part of the lettering and then in front of that part of the lettering. So that's how I did that. this is here again, secondary copy. A lot of times I don't go as crazy with the secondary copy as I do with the primary copy, and that's definitely the case right here with Airoshow. And even this is, you know, a little bit more than Airoshow, but it's still simple compared to what's going on up here. Here's another design I did using those same techniques. It's just a little bit more, you know, as you can see, I talked a little bit about color and contrast before. This is a case where we're not really dealing with color. It's all black and white. And you can see all this is actually power clipped in there. So I can go in there and edit power clip, and you can see that's what's doing that. And we've got, you know, contours and drop shadows and extrudes and all sorts of different things going on here. But the important thing is that there's a lot of contrast between the main part of the lettering and the drop shadows in the background. I want the eye to be drawn to this line here so that this is easy to read from a distance, or easier to read. Same thing goes for this lettering here. So that's an example of, you know, using those same techniques, what you can do with that. Here again, we've got, there's those bars that we created before. Here's that that bevel I showed you in the first design. Go to that first design. This bevel that we created here, if you do the same thing, but in reverse, have it this way, and then you make it a darker color, it actually kind of gives it the illusion that instead of there being a 3D shape popping forward, there's a, you know, it's actually popping backwards, so it's almost like there's an outline here that's raised up, and then this is this falls down a little bit deeper. So you kind of have to think in 3D. Here's the same drop shadow that I showed you how to do in the first example, but what I did was I created some kind of abstract lines and then trimmed it out and kind of created that effect. So here again, using those same tools, I've created that. And as you can see, you can take it down to a one color version and it still works well. And for anybody who's new to design, I would definitely recommend when you're starting out, I mean, even when you're, you know, when you've been at it for a while, I still even design this way. Design in black. If you design things in black and white first, when you start adding color, and you know you're keeping color and contrast in mind while you're doing it, when you add that color, if the design is works well as a black and white design, when you add the color, the design will work well with the color too, as long as you use color in the right way. I'm going to show you one more little thing here. Here again, this is, you can see the bars. We've got that bevel. We've got gradients going on here. We've got extrudes going here. But here's one thing. This is kind of a bevel effect, prismatic effect that you can do a couple different ways. One way is when we created the extrude from earlier, I give this go to this font again. When we used the extrude earlier, and then we went to some of our extrude tools. You can remember we had bevels up here. Oops. There we go. And so you can kind of create bevels that way. The problem with using this tool to do that is your bevel won't go to the center. So as you can see, when I first created that bevel, it was real abstract and all over the place. So you can see if the closer you get to the center, where the angle's too great, like where this A is here, you can see it kind of does things like that. So it's not the best tool for doing a bevel that goes to the center, but it is good for doing bevels that go around the outside. And so, you know, you could light that a certain way and create some really cool effects, like so. So that's one thing. Delete that. The other thing you can do is go up to Windows, Dockers, and let me see, where do we have it here? You can see there's a bevel tool right here, and I've already got mine turned on. So I'll pull out my Dockers here, and I'll go to bevel, and make sure your to center is selected, and hit apply. And we've created a bevel. Now it's not perfect. Anytime you've got software trying to do something like this, it doesn't do it perfectly, but it kind of gets you in the ballpark. And it also depends on what font you use. I mean, this may not have been the best font to showcase this, but on the other hand, it's good to show you that it doesn't work for some fonts, but it does get you in the ballpark. The other problem with using this bevel tool here is this is a bitmap effect. This isn't actually vector. So it looks like it's vector, and when you export it, you know, it looks really nice, but I can't actually go in here and manipulate these lines at all. You could try using Corel Trace to trace this, but what I like to do is use my freehand tool and trace it manually. And by using the bevel Docker effect as a guideline, I can create vector bevels. And so I would go through and I would do it that way, and then I would fix areas that weren't quite right, like this. I would make changes there. So to show you, going back to here, I did the same thing here. Now instead of having the bevel go all the way up through the design, I actually kind of created an effect where I ended it halfway down and then did that effect up there. So if I hold down my control key, I actually have the bevel effect power clipped within this shape. So I'm going to hold down the control key, and you can see I've created my bevel effect in there, and then I've given it gradient colors to simulate the light hitting it in certain ways. So if we go into wireframe, you can see these are all vector shapes with fountain fills, gradient fountain fills. And so that's how I would have done that. Here again, straight lines, lots of contours, lots of bevels, gradients. Here's another example of a nice little bevel effect. And that in a nutshell is how I like to do, you know, some of these more complicated designs, you know, creating really elaborate lettering effects, but still focusing on keeping them easy to read and paying close attention to my contrast and colors. Now, that's not to say every design should be done this way. I've got a few logos that I've done in the past here to show you a few examples. Sometimes you don't have to go and use all the effects. Sometimes just staying grounded and keeping it simple might be the way to go. This is an example of, we've got our little bevel effect, a drop shadow effect, but that's it. No gradients, nothing that would be hard to produce. In our industry, we work with vinyl a lot, so this could be created in vinyl if we wanted to. Or if you were to screen print this would be easier to screen print than, a design that was all over the place. Here's an example of, a design. It's very clean and corporate looking, and it doesn't have a lot of effects. All it has is a slight gradient. One thing I could have done here is create a rectangle here, select both of these, intersect. Oops, this is all grouped together. Let me ungroup that real quick. Ungroup that. So select the rectangle first, then the lettering, and then we'll do intersect. Oops, man, I need to weld all that together. Apologize. Okay. Select the rectangle, select the lettering, and intersect. Now what I've got is half of that lettering there. What you could do with that is adjust our gradient a little bit. And what we've done is a real subtle effect that kind of gives it the illusion that the lettering has some reflective properties, and it's reflecting a horizon line. So that's just kind of a quick little effect I could do and still maintain that corporate look. Here again, something very simple. We've got a drop shadow, that's it. Contours, drop shadow, very simple. So a lot of times you'll have logos that are pretty simple when it comes to, these effects. Here we've got quite a bit more going on. This is a little more complicated of a design. I talked a little earlier about matching the lettering to the illustration. This is a good example of that. This illustration's got a little bit more detail, so I would want the lettering to have detail too, just to kind of work well with that illustration. And very simple, no effects at all, real corporate. Here, I'll show you one more thing. You could see this lettering looks kind of distressed, and that's something that's pretty easy to do. So, I think that's the font I use for that, actually. I'll convert that to curves. And a real easy way to do it would be to select your shape tool and just double click every once in a while and kind of click it and move it around. Maybe even add some curves here or there, and you can kind of create distressed looking lettering that way. Now another thing you can do is if you go to your shape tool here, you have a roughen brush option. You select that, gives you this tool here, and you can actually use that and kind of rub it over parts of the lettering here, and you can kind of see it sort of gives it a rough effect. So that's how I might do something like this. Here's that real subtle reflect effect that I showed you how to do on that design lower down on the page here. I try not to do cute things with lettering. A lot of times when you do that, it makes things harder to read. In this case, I kind of broke my own rule, but I think it still reads well, and because the imagery says pools, it helps illustrate that point. So I broke my own rule there and did that. I want to show you one more here. I did a tutorial which can be found on the CorelDRAW, or I'm sorry, the Corel.com website. If you go to Corel.com, there's a tutorial page on there, and if you go to the CorelDRAW section of the tutorials, you'll find a tutorial that I created for CorelDRAW that shows you how to create this ribbon effect. So I definitely recommend checking that out. It's pretty cool effect that you can do, and like I said, if you go to that website and check that out, let me know what you think. So I think that's about all I can get to today. Please let us know what you think in the comments below, and I'll hope to see you again with another tutorial. Thank you.